Hi everyone, welcome back to Lifting the Lamp. I'm Frater Eleftheria, and in tonight's video I'm going to be talking about a virtually unknown but very powerful and very interesting angel, namely the angel Aborymon. And I've spoken a bit about Aborymon before in my previous videos, and I'll link my previous Aborymon related content in the description below. Just talking about where the name Aborymon comes from and deciphering that name from the Sigillum de Ameth, which is a tool in Enochian magic. And Enochian magic is where the angel Aborymon comes from. It's the magical system that the angel Aborymon belongs to. But what I haven't spoken about is having decoded the name Aborymon and having figured out as far as is possible the attributes of Aborymon, what I was then able to do in terms of finding a way to summon Aborymon and then summon Aborymon and what Aborymon was like as an angel, the sorts of communications that I was given by that angel, and some of the effects of summoning that angel. And that's what I want to talk to you about tonight, because as it happens, I have devised a method for doing that, and I have used it. And there have been results. So that's all of what I'm going to be talking about tonight. So by way of background, in the course of my magical career, my esoteric career, I've been very interested in Enochian magic in particular. And, you know, the most notable example of that is my undertaking the 49-day Gebethel ritual in 2014, 2015. And I've done some videos about that as well on my channel. But my fascination didn't end there. Once I'd done my scrying sessions in the 49-day Gebethel ritual and communicated with a bunch of different angels, got a lot of wisdom that way, I wanted to expand my knowledge even more and, you know, unlock even more different corners of the spiritual worlds as they are mapped out in the Enochian magical system. And so what I did was I started working with the angels of the Heptarchia, with the kings of the Heptarchia. I summoned all 7 of them and got even more knowledge by scrying with those angels, having summoned them. But there were still things I didn't know, and there were still parts of the cosmos I hadn't investigated yet. And one of them, one of the angels, which I had not had any first-hand knowledge of, had not heard the knowledge that it had to offer me, was that of Aborymon. This very mysterious angel, which up until the last few years wasn't even known by Enochian magical practitioners. It's only really Aaron Leach and myself who have even spoken about this angel. And I wanted to work with Aborymon. I knew Aborymon was a powerful angel. Aborymon is one of the angels whose name is hidden in the circumference of the Sigillum de Ameth, and so the angels of the circumference represent the very highest orders of angels. And there's something a bit unusual about this angel as well, and a bit of dark symbolism even behind it, but, you know, darkness that is under the control of God. So I wanted to find out what Aborymon could tell me, what wisdom Aborymon could give me, as indeed the other Enochian angels had provided me with their wisdom. But the problem was there's not much knowledge about the existence of Aborymon, let alone a method of invoking Aborymon and working with Aborymon. So the first thing I had to do was develop such a method, or find out such a method. And so the way that I did that, I was already working with the angels of the Heptarchia, and the Prince and King of Saturn, King Benapson and Prince Borges, have a number of specific offices. One of them is revealing hidden or occult knowledge. And so this kind of knowledge of Aborymon was of the variety, I reckoned, that the King and Prince of Saturn could reveal to me. So on the 9th of May 2020, almost exactly 5 years to this date, I summoned King Benapsen and Prince Borgiz, and I asked them to give me the ritual to invoke Aborymon. And I wasn't disappointed. Whilst scrying with those angels, I received a number of different steps that would allow me to summon Aborymon. The first thing that I needed was frankincense incense, which strongly suggests that Aborymon is related to solar mysteries, or the mysteries of Apollo perhaps, which is quite fitting if you've watched my previous video on the meaning of Aborymon. Black, white or red candles were to be used to summon Aborymon, one of those colours or a combination of them. Next, I was to recite a series of psalms, then an invocation to the Archangel Michael, who had the role of checking the power of Aborymon and making sure that everything remained within the limits that God prescribed for this angel working in the world. And then the final step was to read an invocation of Aborymon. This is an invocation that I received during the scrying session with King Benapsen and Prince Borgiz. And those two heptarchic angels of Saturn also gave me the 3 psalms that I was supposed to read as part of this invocation ritual. These were Psalm 48, which deals with the miraculous deliverance of Jerusalem from enemy armies. Psalm 123, which is all about a type of deliverance from one's enemies that only God is able to bring, a kind of miraculous deliverance from those who seek to do us harm. So these 2 psalms were given randomly, just random numbers that I scried as the psalms, and you can see already that there's common themes between them, and themes which are linked to Aborymon, as you know, in his alleged role as being Apollyon or Abaddon, the destroying angel, not the destruction of things that are good, but the destruction of the wicked and of sin. Very much in keeping with the themes of these psalms so far. And the final psalm was Psalm 159. Now, at this point, if you know your psalms and you know your Bible, you'll notice there's a little bit of an issue here. That's because there's only 150 psalms in the official Bible that we have. So in order to find if there was a Psalm 159, I had to get a bit creative. I had to look through different apocryphal texts and see if there was anything that had been discovered or rediscovered, or simply rejected from the biblical canon, which had been labelled as a 159th Psalm. And it took a little bit of searching, but after a while I discovered the Apostrophe to Judah, which is a hymn that was discovered in the Dead Sea Scrolls and is sometimes labelled as Psalm 159. This was the missing psalm that needed to be included in the invocation. So this Apostrophe to Judah is an eschatological hymn that's all about evildoers being scattered, and in particular uses the phrase, "No longer is Belial in your midst," to communicate this victory over the forces of evil. So again, we have a common theme of the righteous of God being delivered from evil, miraculously even by God, in some sort of battle between good and evil. So once I had the method for invoking Aborymon, I very shortly thereafter set aside a time to do that. And it was 2020, so, you know, we all had a lot of time on our hands at home at that particular point in history. So I did a whole lot of magic, including the invocation of Aborymon. And so I successfully called Aborymon into the room with me and then began to scry to receive messages from Aborymon as to Aborymon's nature and any other particular types of wisdom that Aborymon might want to pass on. So I'll give the kind of highlights of that now. One thing that stood out that Aborymon told me is to confirm his identity with Abaddon or Apollyon in the book of Revelation, the kind of destroying angel of the last days, who's in league with God, but is kind of a creature of the abyss and has quite a dark persona and quite a sinister role in the kind of end time scenario. And then Aborymon gave me a bunch of teachings. And one thing in particular that Aborymon taught me, which was quite interesting, was this concept of the two fires. And so basically what Aborymon told me was that the very highest heaven, the Empyrean, which is also the heaven that is opened by the missing call, as I learned when I discovered that Enochian call, that level of the heavens, that very highest level, is pure fire. And similarly, the very lowest infernal dimension is also pure fire. Both of these extremes of the universe, of the spiritual cosmos, are an all-consuming fire that burns up everything that is not holy. So because of that, these two fires can almost be considered like analogous to one another. Not exactly the same, but it's like one is the inversion of the other, but then not really, because they're still the same fire. They still have that same fiery quality and that same purifying quality. But there's a kind of mystery here that the same fire burns in both the higher and lower kind of spiritual levels of reality. I was also given mysteries about how good a situation or a being or some kind of reality that is good can nevertheless contain bits of evil within it. And even though it has evil within it, it can still be good overall. The existence of the evil within the good does not mar the good so much that it negates the overarching goodness of a particular kind of reality. And this is, of course, talking about God, and it's talking about the universe that God has created. And it's kind of moving towards an answer of the question of how can a good God also create evil? If God creates evil as well as good, how can God then be good? And there's more in that mystery to unpack, but it is not yet time for me to reveal that. But just broadly speaking, this was something that Aborymon told me. And Aborymon spoke a lot about pouring out the fires of wrath and the outpouring of that fire upon the world in the last days. Whether that's meant literally or symbolically, I'm not sure. But Aborymon also spoke a lot about the building of the temple as a symbolic kind of narrative, or perhaps in literal terms, who knows. And the other thing that Aborymon mentioned was this concept of the, quote, purifying waters, and that these purifying waters were contrasted with the fires of wrath, and they were presented as, in symbolic terms, the thing that could put out the fires of wrath, the sort of waters of purification, the waters that make us holy, as being the thing that saves us from this fire. And that term, purifying waters, that specific term will become very important later on as I explain some other things. So just park that for now. I also want to talk a little bit about what Aborymon was like, what the feel of that angelic entity was like. Aborymon was certainly a sinister being in terms of how Aborymon appeared in the spirit vision, the kind of energy that Aborymon brought into the invocation. But nevertheless, you know, if you could see through that surface level kind of quality of Aborymon, you could see that there was a fierce loyalty to the light and to fighting against evil. To use an analogy with modern characters, you might say that Aborymon came across a bit like Batman. You know, this kind of dark, sinister, bat-like creature in appearance, but very much trying to fight against evil and protect the human race from some real monsters. And so that's the kind of vibe that I got from Aborymon. Definitely not an evil angel. And, you know, everything that Aborymon did and said during the invocation occurred under the watchful eye of the Archangel Michael. So what were the results of me summoning Aborymon? Well, the most immediate result was the revelations that I received, which I wrote down, as with other angelic communications that I've received after a scrying session. But also in the long term, in the kind of years that followed, I started to notice some themes within Scripture as I began to be more familiar with Scripture, which were very similar to what Aborymon was teaching. And I also started to see things unfolding in the world which seemed to follow the same kinds of themes that Aborymon raised during his communications with me. So remember when I mentioned purifying waters before? I'd like to take us back to that for a moment. Because, you know, as I was studying certain topics from the Bible in the last year or so, this was a term that I came across during my reading. This exact term, purifying waters, which I was astonished to find. And I did a search through Bible concordances that are available online, and I found that this specific term, purifying waters, only appears in the one place that I'd found it. And that place that I found this term, purifying waters, is in the book of Numbers. And it's related to the verses in the book of Numbers that is to do with the prophecy of the red heifer. If you don't know what this is, buckle up. I've done a video on the red heifers before, which you can find on my channel. I might link it in the description below, who knows, we'll see. But basically, in order for the Israelites to build the temple, there's a precondition that the people must be ritually purified. And in order to be ritually purified, they need to sacrifice a red heifer, a pure red cow, and you know, without spot or blemish. And this type of cow, this perfect red heifer, is notoriously difficult to breed. So anyway, once they have the red heifer, they sacrifice the red heifer, burn the remains, and then mix the ashes with water to purify the people, to make them worthy for the new temple. And those ashes mixed with the water is what is termed the purifying waters. And there's a few other little connections which are common to what Aborymon told me in this series of verses as well. One you might have noticed is the connection with the building of the temple. Another is a connection with the last days, because when a red heifer appears again, it's seen as a sign that another attempt at building the temple in Jerusalem will begin shortly, which is another sign of the end times. So there's a lot of really strange coincidences linking, you know, the themes that Aborymon raised during his scrying communications with me, and this particular section of the book of Numbers. But it gets even more freaky than that. So in the last couple of years, this issue of the red heifer has arisen again, and that's because it's on people's radar again, and that's because for the first time since 70 AD, nearly 2,000 years, a red heifer has been born again, a perfect red cow meeting the criteria in the book of Numbers. In fact, not just one, but 5. I believe 1 or 2 of those have been disqualified now, but at least 3 such heifers have now been born. And this is even more remarkable when you consider the fact that in all of human history, only 9 of these rare red cows have been born up until this point. And now we have 3 or more, all in the same period of time. So that's why people have been talking about this prophecy again of the red heifer in the last couple of years. So I wondered if there was any sort of synchronizing of when these red heifers came into the world and manifested themselves, and what I was doing magically. Because sometimes, as above, so below, as within, so without. There can, the things that are happening in the external world can sometimes be mirrored in what's going on in our own personal magical work, and there's kind of larger energies at play in both of those domains. So I wanted to see what was happening in my magical life around the time, or directly before the time, that the red heifers manifested themselves. And what I discovered was the working to summon Aborymon. So the red heifers were born in September or October of 2021. What we're looking at really is a period lasting several months before December 2020 for this process to really start to manifest itself. And if you go back a few months from December 2020, it gets very close to the point in time when I engaged in the Aborymon working. And I summoned Aborymon on the 18th of June 2020. I'm not saying that Aborymon was responsible for the birth of the red heifers. Perhaps Aborymon was, but I'm not saying that that's the case. But there was definitely a synchronicity where Aborymon being summoned for the first time in human history, actually, it happened at the same time these red heifers, and that there might be a symbolic significance to those two events happening very close to one another. And they might be pointing to the same unfolding scenario where the human race is being prepared for a time of great purification. At a time where we will understand the power of the consuming flames is close at hand, and in order to preserve ourselves from the flames, we need to be purified. We need to aspire to holiness. And so these two events, the summoning of Aborymon and the birth of the red heifers, are both portents that encourage us towards that kind of spiritual purification. And there have certainly been events in the world which signs both of the calamity that humanity is giving rise to amongst themselves, but also that there is some part of us that is aspiring towards rediscovering that holiness and preserving that as everything else seems to fall apart. So that is a summary of my experiences with the angel Aborymon. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like, subscribe to my channel to support my work, and if you want to support me further, please hit join or thanks down below. But thank you again for listening, and I'll see you next time.